This is the second short video clip to Christiana Figueres, who is currently chairing the UN climate change talks in Warsaw. In the first clip, I explain why nuclear weapons must be put on the climate change negotiating tables, and why failure to do this will result in runaway climate change or nuclear war. Christiana, I am going to explain to you why this is so important. There are two basic types of nuclear weapon states: those who have nuclear weapons legally and those who have nuclear weapons illegally. Those that have them legally are the P5 members of the United Nations Security Council. They represent the interests of the most industrialized nations on the planet. They are also the biggest arms manufacturers, the biggest arms exporters, they have the biggest military budgets, and they have all violated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They are all locked into competition with each other, and they are all the biggest emitters of CO2 into the environment. They have all used the veto in the United Nations Security Council to protect their interests or the interests of their allies, or they have used the military might against the principles of natural justice. And they can do this because they were the winning industrial powers at the end of the Second World War. The UN P5 Security Council does not represent the rest of the planet. It does not represent Africa, despite Africa being the scene of some of the bloodiest fighting during the Second World War, and despite Africa being plundered by the industrial nations since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Africa is not represented because it was not industrialized at the end of the Second World War. Neither is India nor Pakistan represented on the P5 Security Council, despite the suffering that the Indian and the Pakistani people suffered during the Second World War. And they were not represented because the Indians and the Pakistanis were subjected to the British Empire and had their rights of self-determination denied. There is also no representation for the indigenous communities, despite the industrialized nations causing them so much damage, from land grabs to nuclear weapons tests. To acknowledge their rights would be to derail industrial progress and the right of militaries to destroy the environment. These unrepresented groups are also the groups in the vanguard of the fight on climate change. The P5 nation, by not representing them, is fundamentally undemocratic. To maintain economic advantage, the P5 nations must protect the interests of their corporations over the interests of their people, and every other nation is forced to do likewise to compete in that same race. It has perverse side effects. In 2012, Russia and America, along with China and India, all came together to overturn the EU's attempts to curtail aviation's greenhouse gas emissions, despite each one of those nations being involved in nuclear standoffs against each other. Today, the United States and China are cooperating together to develop the Canadian tar sands while killing the indigenous communities of Canada, and while simultaneously pointing nuclear weapons towards each other. They all equally suppress environmental protest. The second group of nations with nuclear weapons are those that are not allowed to have them, and that have either violated the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or withdrawn from it. Democracies and dictatorships are equally at fault. They are forced to seek nuclear weapons, to seek protection from the policies of those who legally have nuclear weapons and who abuse that legal right. It is a destabilizing vortex of industrialized violence, with each nuclear-armed nation pointing to others as justification for maintaining and upgrading their own arsenals, and each being forced to maintain the economic strength to continue the nuclear fight. This can only be broken by replacing the undemocratic P5 Security Council with a democratically elected alternative whose remit is to protect the planet and the environment for the sake of all humanity, rather than to protect the right of the most powerful nations to continue industrializing against the evidence of runaway climate change. Our industrialized society has now reached its limits. As a global community, we must now prepare for the old age of industrialization. Like any old person who uses the experience of youth and the wealth acquired through life to provide a cushion for old age, we must do the same on a global basis. And like any old person who tries to carry on life as if still an impetuous youth, they will have the rest of their life cut short. In the face of climate change, we cannot carry on with the political structures and philosophies that guided us through the growth of industrialization and which are cemented in place by the possession of nuclear weapons. I call on you again, Christiana, to force nuclear weapons onto the climate change negotiating tables. Thank you.